one would want to be. Good morning, everybody. Hello. Welcome. Good to see you. Just back in the saddle. Another week has gone by. Is time speeding up? I mean, it's just feeling like months are going by in a blur now. Really good to be with you. We are, as always, here on a Sunday morning exploring the deeper side of life. We're opening to the secrets of the soul and understanding from a more integrated perspective all the different angles and approaches that we as a human species have taken in terms of understanding the nature of the soul, and especially in our conversation this morning, the journey of the soul. And so we're going to be looking at this journey from a Buddhist, a Gnostic, and a Course in Miracles perspective. This journey of the soul has been couched within a monomyth of sorts, a meta-narrative that has been referred to as the prodigal son, or the journey of the child away from the father's house into the far country. And what we'll see as we look into these teachings, that this is really a universal story, and it represents two things. Number one, we are not at home in the world. And number two, our origin is from a place beyond the world. And so we want to, as these spiritual beings having a human experience, understand these maps of consciousness and see what they offer us in terms of insights and ways of reorienting our belief system, our cognitive process, and our priorities, essentially. So I just offer all of this for you to consider, to contemplate, to accept and reject as you will. I am in no way pushing an ideology upon you. What I am doing is putting out a smorgasbord of sorts to have you look and see what you like and what resonates with you at this time. So I do want to make that clear. Like I had said, we're going to explore the deeper side of life from this perspective of journeying. And to get our orientation on this ascent of sorts, we will first consider from the perspective of A Course in Miracles, what guideposts to look for along this journey, and what really is going on behind the scenes that oftentimes we're not really paying attention to at the surface level of awareness. You know, because one of the things that we are told within this myth, if you will, of the soul's journey, is that we've gotten blinded by the world. Our senses, instead of turning in to experience the deeper nature and the inner light and the subtle energy, our attention and our senses have turned out. And so this turning out, as we'll see also within the Gnostic journey of the soul, has caused us to seek in illusion for what we can only find in truth. And so this turning inward is really the first step, is as they say in Tibetan Buddhism, in order to get on the path, you have to first have a revulsion or a distaste for samsara, for this reality of phenomena, and begin to seek the essential nature above the nature of the world. So the senses get repurposed, as does the body, as we'll see. So this is a teaching that's taken from Chapter 8 in A Course in Miracles. The section is called The Treasure of God, and it really gets to the essence of who we are and what this journey is really about. And he actually starts by saying this: "Forget not the kingdom of God for anything the world has to offer. The world can add nothing to the power and glory of God and his holy children, but it can blind the children to the Father if they behold it," that is, the world. He says this: "You cannot behold the world and know God. Only one is true." So this is, again, where, he's going to mention the prodigal story in a second, But remember, the prodigal child goes into the far country on this journey of pleasure and hedonism and self-indulgence. And what happens is there's a famine in the land, and all of that pleasure, that ephemeral indulgence dries up, it goes away. And it was then that the prodigal began to come to her or his senses, because there was a breakdown, there was a breaking point. Without having that breaking point, for one reason or another, we seem to be very resistant to turning around. So the journey really begins when you have your breakdown, when you have this seeming tragedy, crisis, challenge, whatever way that may look, and it causes you to stop going in the wrong direction and begin to consider the only other alternative, which is to seek the kingdom, right? Whatever way you want to symbolize that. So you cannot behold the world and know God. Only one is true. What do you value, right? What do you treasure, and how much do you treasure it, is one of the main questions that he says in the Course that we should always ask ourselves. What do we treasure, and how much do we treasure it? Because we're always getting what we want, and we're always ready to protect and defend what we treasure. And he says that we're oftentimes on this default setting of wanting to protect the ego, save the face of the ego, rather than seek the face of God. So, as we go into this deeper side of life and we explore these teachings that open up the hidden mysteries of our own being, one of the things that often comes up, especially early on, is that we have to admit to ourselves we've been going in the wrong direction. And if we are in any way, full of that authority problem, as he talks about in the Course, we oftentimes feel like, I don't want to be wrong. I'm doing everything in my power not to be wrong. In fact, everybody else in my life is wrong. I'm the only one who's right. And so if you have a scenario like that going on where all of the wrong people are out there and they seem to be proliferating, then oftentimes it's because we are in an unconscious refusal to acknowledge our own mistakes. And it's when we can accept that we've been wrong about ourselves and about the direction that our life should go in, that helps. That's part of the breaking down, right? I've been doing it my way, it doesn't work anymore. So this is where we, again, reconsider what is true. And then he says, I come to tell you, now Jesus is speaking in the first person in the Course in Miracles, if you can believe that. He says, I am come to tell you that the choice of which is true is not your choice. So what is true is not your choice. It's beyond choice. Truth is reality. Truth is beyond choosing. You can accept it or reject it, but it's not up to you to make what is true, despite our postmodern, post-Christian belief systems that this world is perpetuating. We can't make truth on our own. Truth is before any separate perspective. There is a true truth, an absolute truth. And he says that it's not our choice what is true. If it were, he says, you would have destroyed yourself. But God did not will the destruction of his creations, having created them for eternity. His will has saved you. Now listen to this. His will has saved you not from yourself, but from your illusions of yourself. So this is another deeper teaching that you often don't get within common spiritual traditions, and that is, yourself is one with God always in eternity. The only reason why we don't experience that right now is we are in this hypnotic spell of believing that we are another self. And that is an illusion about ourselves. It's a dream, as he would call it. And that's why this path is often referred to as a path of awakening. So you're really just awakening to what you always are already. So this is a path to dispel illusions about yourself, not to give you a self. That's already been done for all eternity. But to dispel illusions about yourself, that you could be in a far country, that you could have squandered your life, that you could be separated from your source. All of that is an illusion, believable and real to the one who believes it, but not true. And then he says, no one created by God can find joy in anything except the eternal. That is not because he is deprived of anything else, but because nothing else is worthy of him. So if we are pursuing the pleasures of the world, if we are seeing the logic of what's being said here, pursuing the pleasures of the world really has a deep-seated unworthiness within the self. So only the eternal is worthy of us, and only we are worthy of only that joy will bring us true happiness. So we're going to build on this idea of worthy, unworthy, because that's really at the heart of this journey and why we're not experiencing the joy of the eternal now in this moment. For one reason or another, we have really declared ourselves to be unworthy. And he says we are really suffering from the sense of self-exclusion. Like right now, listening right here this morning, we assume, without even thinking about it, that we're not at home in the kingdom. We're not in a state of enlightened presence. And that assumption is an unexamined belief that is actually based on what he's talking about, a deep-seated, unconscious belief, existential grip on the idea that you're unworthy of eternity, right? That you're not worth it. You're not worth being in that state of enlightenment. And that's because we are excluding ourselves. And what's really crazy is we're excluding ourselves because we've bought into an illusory self, right? So I often use this as the example, but of course everybody has one. You call it by your name, I call it John. As long as I'm being John, I'm excluding myself from the kingdom. And with this self-exclusion, John gets to live in this moment as John. As long as I'm being John, I'm going to be needy, I'm going to be uncertain, I'm going to be anxious, I'm going to be honestly seeking after enlightenment, I'm going to want joy, I'm going to want peace, I'm going to want pleasure. But John is only at home in the world. And so as long as I'm being John, John is going to look to the world for his peace, his joy, his pleasure. And John gets very upset when the world doesn't go his way and doesn't do what it should do so that he can find his peace, his joy, and his pleasure. Underneath that, and unconscious to my waking state, is I am denying my real self, asserting this illusion called John. And that is why I have anxiety, loss of peace, and this yearning need to find fulfillment. If I am unaware of that denial of being my real self, I'm going to pour more attention, more energy, more will into the project called John. I'll make a better John. I'll make a more successful John, a prettier John, or a more handsome John. Whatever it is that's going to allure and bring to me the things that I want from others in the world. So, what does it profit a person if he gains the whole world and loses awareness of his soul? Because that's the purpose of the world, is to perpetuate this illusion of yourself, land of illusion, right? again, until we've come to the place of the breaking point, we're probably not going to want to even consider these ideas as viable, right? Because we are hell-bent on making the illusory true. So he says, again, no one created by God can find joy in anything except the eternal. That is not because he or she is deprived of anything else, but because nothing else is worthy of him. What God and his children create is eternal, and in this, and this only, is their joy. Then he says here, listen to the story of the prodigal son and learn what God's treasure is and yours. And so he takes this story from the gospel and he puts a little different spin on it so that we can see the truer, deeper message of what it was meant to convey. He says, the son of a loving father left his home and thought he squandered everything for nothing of any value, though he did not know its worthlessness at the time. That's an important part. So we leave our soul identity, go into the experience of being a body in the world, and that becomes top priority. And we are in the world thinking that the world truly has something to offer. And we are making it really important and valuable. We don't consider the world worthless while we're pursuing what we're pursuing. It's worth more than anything. And so he says, although he didn't consider it worthless at the time, he was ashamed to return to his father because he thought he had hurt him. But when he came home, the father welcomed him with joy, because only the son himself was his father's treasure. The father wanted nothing else. So this is where we have to stop, allow these ideas to really percolate and enter into our intimate space, because we are, again, on a default setting of not letting in the fact that we're worthy. In fact, he says that we are the treasure that God is seeking. That you are God's treasure. This is all for you. She just wants to love you. And we can't experience that when we're still under this delusory spell of thinking we're another self that can get stuff from the world. We can't come home as long as we believe that. That's why he says, when you think you are unwilling to will with God, you're not thinking. God's will is thought. It cannot be contradicted by thought. And so in our thought process this morning, he's saying there is one question that you need to ask yourself. And again, he's putting it within this terminology of A Course in Miracles. Do I want to know my Father's will for me? He will not hide it. He has revealed it to me, says the Christ, because I asked it of him and learned of what he had already given. And he assures us again in this asking of, do we want to know the will of God for us? He says, you who are God's own treasure, do not regard yourself as valuable. And then given this belief, you cannot understand anything. So, given that, he says, I share with God the knowledge of the value he puts upon you. We're going to see how this plays out in the story of the soul from the Gnostic tradition, the Gnostic Christian tradition, that Jesus is coming in as this presence of divine grace to literally pick us up out of our lostness, our illusions. And so he says, I share with God the knowledge of the value he puts on you. My devotion to you is of him, being born of my knowledge of myself and him. We cannot be separated. Whom God has joined cannot be separated. And then he says, can you be separated from your life and your being? And this is that famous statement, the journey to God is merely the reawakening of the knowledge of where you are always and what you are forever. I want to say that again. It's just so beautiful and profound. The journey to God is merely the reawakening of the knowledge of where you are always and what you are forever. That's the journey. He says, it is a journey without distance to a goal that has never changed. You're the treasure. Doesn't that like fly in the face of everything you think about yourself? It does for me. You're the treasure. You're the whole purpose of this divine revelation in whatever form, in whatever culture it appears. It's coming for you because you're not at home here. That's why he says finally here, truth can only be experienced. It cannot be described and it cannot be explained. I can make you aware of the conditions of truth, but the experience is of God. Very intimate, beyond thought. Together, he says, we can meet its conditions, but truth will dawn upon you of itself. What God has willed for you is yours. He has given his will to his treasure, which is you. Your heart lies where your treasure is, as his does. So again, to feel this in a deeper sense, your heart lies where your treasure is, as God's heart lies where his treasure is. In other words, God's heart is with you. He's yearning for you to recognize what's already been given to you always and forever, which is himself, which is everything. You who are beloved of God are wholly blessed. Learn this of me and free the holy will of all those who are as blessed as we are. So these are the touching points that we'll see being repeated within these other stories that we're going to explore. You're the treasure. And there is a process of meeting the conditions so that we can eventually shed our deep-seated unworthiness and accept our inheritance, which is always and forever, which is the very kingdom that we are. So the story that we're going to look at now comes from the Mahayana scripture, the Lotus, or threefold Lotus Sutra. And this is a teaching from the Buddha. And you'll see within this teaching the clear repetition of the prodigal myth. But there's such beautiful nuance that is added to this story that I think will shed a lot of light for us and how we understand this, the minutia of the journey. So the disciples actually tell this story to the Buddha because they're coming to terms with their existential situation. And so they're explaining to the Buddha that what they now realize for themselves, it is like a man who in his youth leaves his father and runs away. For long he dwells in some other country for 10, 20, or 50 years. The older he grows, the more needy he becomes. Roaming about in all directions to seek clothing and food, he gradually wanders along till he unexpectedly approaches his native country. From the first, the father searched for his son, but in vain. And meanwhile, the father settled in a certain city. His home became very rich, his goods and treasures incalculable. Gold, silver, lapis lazuli, etc., youth, slaves, retainers, the guy's rich, okay? The Mahayana authors have, a love of words. And so the poor son is this itinerant worker, and he's wandering from village to village looking for odd jobs and menial labor to support himself, subsistence living. And he actually wanders into this area of the city where he sees the father's mansion. And he sees the father sitting on this lion throne with a bejeweled footstool and attendants all around and ostrich feathers cooling him off and people bowing with trays of food, etc. And he figures, you know what, I got to get out of here because he's going to send somebody to basically, take me in as a slave, and I'm going to have no control over this, and I'll be basically his hostage, and I'll be a slave for the rest of my days. So he runs away, and as he's running away, the father looks and sees, that's my boy. And that's Buddha's words. And he sends his hired help, his servants, to go get the guy. Now, here's this 50-year-old man running away, and when the servants lay hold of him, he's freaking out, like, no, no, and he literally faints out of terror. And this is exactly what Jesus was saying in A Course in Miracles. Like, we feel like we hurt God deep down. This is unconscious. And so there's terror in going home. We feel like we've done something wrong. That's why we feel unworthy and shameful. We don't know this consciously, remember, but anytime we feel shame, it's just an echo. Every time we feel unworthy, it's an echo of this deeper soul feeling. And so this guy is feeling it come on where he literally loses consciousness. So the father says, leave him alone. We can't force him. He's got to will this for himself. So the father, and the Lotus Sutra is all about, skillful means, tactfulness. So how do we bring the infinite to the finite mind in a way that doesn't freak out the finite mind? Oh, this is what the story tells us. The father looks around and he sees the ugliest people, one eye and no teeth, that work for him. You guys, come here. Yeah, you fit the bill. So these, ill-formed individuals dress in rags, and they go and find this beggar son, and basically now there's rapport. I can identify with you. You represent me. And so he begins to have a conversation with these guys, and the guys are like, you know what, this rich man is hiring day laborers, and he pays really well. So you're just going to have to shovel some dirt and clean out the latrines. And the son is like, I could do that. So he gets hired, and for 20 years, he's literally shoveling dirt and cleaning out the toilets. And he feels totally good about it. Like, this is where he belongs. This is what he belongs doing. He doesn't realize that this is what we talked about in that mystical way. This is the way of purgation. So he's accepted to come home, but he doesn't know that consciously yet. He's laboring in this purification process. And it says here, hold on, I had it. Forgive me. So then he's in the field laboring, and the father puts on rags. And he goes out and he's barking orders at other people to make it appear like, I'm the boss. And he goes up to his son and he says, be at ease in your mind. I am, as it were, your father. Do not be worried again. Wherefore I am old and advanced in years, but you are young and vigorous. All the time you have been working, you have never been deceitful, lazy, angry, or grumbling. I have never seen you have such vices as these, like the other laborers. From this time forth you shall be as my own begotten son. So notice that there is a qualification to come into that next level. You have to have put down the vices and cultivated virtue. Then you go to the next level. You enter across the next threshold of that journey towards yourself. You're not indulging the vices, which are all part of the illusory self that's identified with the world. You've gotten out of the pig pen, and you're coming back towards the purity. So now this language, from this time forth, you shall be as my own begotten son, brings him to a new existential understanding of himself. And yet, the son still wouldn't give up his job. He's still cleaning out the toilets, still removing dirt. And there builds in him a confidence. Now that he's able to go into the house now, he's not just out in the field, he's part of the family structure. He's starting to get a taste of what it's like to be in the Father's house, even though he's still on the way of purgation. So the way of illumination just starts to dawn in his awareness. He's starting to go into the Father's house. And then the father approaches him because he's getting old, and he realizes, I have all this wealth, and here is my heir, and I want to leave this to him. So he begins to say, look, I'm going to train you on how to govern my estate and handle all of my wealth. And then it says the poor son accepts his instructions and commands and becomes acquainted with all the goods, gold, silver, and precious things as well as the granaries, treasuries, etc., but has no idea of expecting to receive as much as a meal while his abode is still the original place, and his sense of inferiority too he is still unable to abandon. So through this process, this is, remember, speaking directly to all of us, we're getting these teachings, we're being, given this vision, and yet there's still this deep-seated inferiority, right? We're separate. We're excluding ourselves from the infinite love, but we're drawing closer to it. And as we begin to draw closer, we're still going to feel this deep-seated inferiority until we can finally recognize, as the son does in this story, that all of the wealth belongs to him, belongs to you. And it says finally here, when the poor son heard that all of the wealth was his, great was his joy at such unexpected news, and thus he thought, without any mind for or effort on my part, these treasures now come of themselves to me. So stages along the way of letting go of our inferiority, our neediness, our withholding ourselves from the abundant life. So that was the Buddha's rendition. And finally, and I need to preface this, we're going to be looking into the Nag Hammadi, which is this story called the exegesis of the soul, or the interpretation of the soul. And for the Gnostics in this school of thought, instead of looking at it in terms of laboring a father with, or a son with his father, this is being looked at more romantically. That there's like a spiritual sexuality, if you will, involved in this teaching. And what they're trying to get across, and they actually say it at one point, this is not the sexuality of the body, this is true love making with the soul and its source. It's the same passion that you would have felt within the world, in the bodies of the world, becomes redirected and recognized that the source of this joy of joining with another was really reserved for joining with your source. And so the soul in this story is looked at as feminine. Okay? Take a little drink here. And I would encourage you, think about what's coming up for you as we talk about all of this, because we'll take a few minutes at the end to field any thoughts or questions that you guys might have, things that you want to drill down on a little more. So would love a little interaction at the end if that's something that suits you. So this is the exegesis of the soul. And it's really sort of a Reader's Digest version of a much larger story that we looked at last week when we talked about the resurrection. It comes from the Pistis Sophia, which is this story of a goddess, basically, that wanted to experience life outside of the kingdom and got trapped within the material energies. And these material energies basically had her lose her sense of self, and she got lost in the illusions of the world, which is kind of our story. So this is the idea here where it says that the fall of the soul, while the soul was alone with the Father, she was a virgin and androgynous in form. When she fell into a body and entered this life, she fell into the hands of many robbers. These shameless men passed her from one to the other and violated her. Some raped her, others seduced her with gifts. They defiled her, and she lost her virginity. In her body she became a whore and gave herself to everyone, and she considered each sexual partner to be her husband. After she gave herself to shameless, faithless adulterers for them to abuse her, she sighed deeply and repented. But when she turned her face from those adulterers, she ran after others, and they made her live with them and serve them in their beds as if they were her masters. She was ashamed. And when she did not dare to leave, and she then did not dare to leave them. For a long time they fooled her into thinking they respected her like faithful true husbands, but finally they left and abandoned her. She became a poor lost widow. She was helpless, and no one even gave ear to her in her pain. She got nothing from the adulterers except the filth they left when they had sex with her. The children she had from the adulterers are mute, blind, and sickly. They are disturbed. Right? Now, let's put this into right context. Remember, the soul is our consciousness. We're associating it with material energies, physical laws, and the rules of the governments of the world, if you will, things that we are saying are master over us, that have power over us. and we don't realize where we've come from. And as we've given our authority away, it's like having sex. This is the idea here. We join with the things that we give worth to. And as a result of that, they beget children in us, and these children are thoughts. So when we give our beliefs to the belief system of the world, we have thoughts that are mute, blind, and sickly. They're thoughts that only keep us within the darkness of the world. They are not thoughts that can bring us back into the height. Right? So this is the idea that they're using, it's to shock you, it's to shock us, this imagery. But also keep in mind, as I read this, sometimes we actually embody this. We will actually sometimes have experiences of being this in the world, being used, being abused, being taken advantage of, seeking after promiscuous pleasure in hopes that somebody will actually tell us we're worth something. We matter, we're valuable. And sometimes people see that and they play you, or, it could be the shoes on the other foot. But this is something that can happen at every level, is what we're saying. So within consciousness for sure, but some of us actually embody this quite literally. And then we eventually come to the place, like she's saying, that the father noticed her, looked down on her, and saw her sighing in pain and disgrace and repenting of her prostitution, right? This is, again, having allegiance with the things of the world, giving reality to the illusion. That's the prostitution. She began to call on him for help. And she sighed with all her heart and said, Father, save me. Look, I shall tell you how I left home and fled from my maiden's quarters. Restore me to yourself. When he sees her in this condition, he will consider her worthy of his mercy, for many afflictions have come upon her because she left home. So the breaking point. And then the recognition that she has to go back home to the one reality, right? So then here we just continue on. As long as the soul keeps running into the world and there having sex with whomever she meets, and defiling herself, she will suffer what she deserves. But when she perceives the trouble she is in and weeps before God and repents, the Father will extend grace to her. So it's always based on how we are choosing, what direction we're choosing to go in. So then it gets to be where when she does have this turnabout within her heart, it says that the inner senses begin to come back into her awareness. She begins to sense this higher reality. And she undergoes this connection with the Christ mind, right? Okay. You get the story. So, any thoughts from you guys based on all of this?
Yeah, John, you were talking about the young man that had the rich father, and that by kind of being in training or being exposed to what he was for many years, he started to kind of gain an understanding or awareness. And then I believe he said something to the effect that he heard what he was entitled to.
Yeah, so let me just repeat for those that are at home. So you're mentioning again the story of the Buddha, where the son began to have a sense of worth and value restored to himself by his actions in that way of purgation.
Okay, and then he became aware of what his inheritance was. I guess, I don't want to hang on this, but what was the tipping point? Was it a fact of awareness just kind of came to him, or was something that was said, or
Yeah, great question. What was the tipping point? And I would say that it's a very subtle experience that occurs in the story, that the more he's putting in the time of devoted service, he's then able to communicate with the Father. So you'll see as the story starts, he's freaked out by the Father. There's no communication. There's fear and a running away and a sense that if I communicate with him, I'll become a slave. I don't want to be a hostage to him. Then, as that fear is allayed, he becomes more attuned to communication. And the Father, even though he has to step down from that throne, he's still the Father and is able to communicate with the Son. And it's in that communication that the begetting takes place. Right? So this is an important aspect. I'm so glad you brought it out. You know, St. Peter says this in the New Testament letter, that we were begotten by the seed or the word of God, that something happened to our soul, that when the message, when the teaching, the gospel, or in this case the Dharma, was spoken to us, it fertilized us. We had a potential to be the Son in this case, but it was an unfertilized or an unactualized potential. But as we began our labors, it became where that presence was able to fertilize that potential within us, and it began to wake us up to our true status.
yeah, I've always kind of thought that's pivotal, on that pathway to atonement or to redemption, and how we assimilated that. And I think things happen, like to me, just recently, I wondered why my pathway was not opening up a little more to me each day.
You were wondering why your pathway was not opening up.
I didn't, I wasn't. And then I realized that all I was really talking about was what am I going to get?
What's in it for me?
I had forgotten about others that I know.
So there's the block. Beautiful. Beautiful.
And it wasn't my idea either.
And you can see that the story kind of gets across this selfless service, which is really the requirement to the inheritance, that we're not doing this spiritual practice. We're not on this journey to get something. We are here to actually dispel the illusions of our own neediness and unworthiness so that we may discover that we already are the treasure. That's a very different way of travel, isn't it? We're not here to fill up our lack. We're here to get rid of the illusion of ourself that believes in lack. Right? It's a complete flip in ego logic.
It's an important crossroads, if you will, or a divide in the highway, a road less traveled.
Yep. Very good, Dave. Thank you. Anybody else? Thoughts? Yes.
So, within these three stories, I see the theme of coming back home. But what was the reason these children or spirits left in the first place? They had everything they needed.
Yeah.
Why did they leave?
Yeah. The quest for something more, something other, something novel, something different. And in A Course in Miracles, he even dials that in more, that we want it, just like the Gnostics will say this, we want it God on our terms. We want it to be the center of reality and feel special and unique and separate from everything and everyone else. And in that wish to be separate, to find pleasure for ourselves alone, we actually ventured out of that totality where everyone gets everything and is everything. So the desire, like it says in that Genesis story, take this fruit and you shall be gods, right? You can do it all on your own. You don't need that higher authority. You can be your own authority. You can author your own life. You can do it your way. And that's seductive. So we got seduced with that thought, would be one way of approach to that answer. Does that make sense?
It does. Just thinking in a holistic terms, it sort of puts the onus on the individual rather than on the collective to, where God is all, but if, I'm here, so I'll get into it. If God is all loving and all wonderful and all giving, then why is it that we even have to suffer this path?
Yeah.
If it's not for our greater good to walk out, only our greater good to walk back.
Yeah.
Why do we have to walk out in the first place?
Because we willed it. And he's so loving that he always gives us what we will. It does. It does. If you're not a control freak and you're trying to force people to obey you, that's not the way of reality. The way of reality is total freedom and self-expression. And so if somebody wants to express themselves in a self-destructive way, he'll set up safeguards and will give you the way back when you're ready, but he will not prevent anyone from going the way of pain if that's their choice. He doesn't create pain, and he'll answer us when we cry out and ready to end pain. But if we choose pain, this is what we don't understand. We're literally created as and by his will. Our will, as we're told in A Course in Miracles, is as powerful as God's will. So whatever you will, you create. That's why if we're willing without wisdom, we're creating pain. He doesn't do that to us. He's wisdom itself. He would love to come into our mind and bring us back into the joy of co-creatorship. But if we are not willing to do that, and we're still thinking that the illusions are more valuable, then that's what we're going to get, because that's what we want. Anything else? I love pushback.
I'll think on that for a second.
Okay. Okay, good. Anybody else? Yes, Carol.
I had a really nice message yesterday. And the nice message was we lost a beloved brother-in-law.
You lost your brother-in-law.
And he was a very religious man, very giving man, very generous man. He worked his whole life, to just to be, I knew him as a loving soul. And he passed, and my sister-in-law said, and they said that he came to her in their kitchen at the house.
So your brother-in-law who deceased visited your sister-in-law. Again, I'm just saying this for the folks at home.
Yes. And what he said to her, Carol, her name is Carol, it's all real. It's real. Where we believe that God is all good, all love, it's real.
How nice.
And that's the second time, and that gives me the goosebumps because he was a loving, giving man. He said, it's all real. I'm right in God's love.
Mm.
I had another friend that came back and I said, I prayed him in. And he came back to me and he said, I'm here. You keep calm.
Mm.
And I said, oh, this is years ago before the course. Do I need to be Jewish? Yeah. Where are you? And I want to clear out Persian. Just direct me. And he said, silly girl. He said, it's real.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing to me how our illusions that we create out here, and really, we're already home. We're already home if we can
Well,
embody.
let me jump on that. Just like the story from the Buddhist scripture said that the son was in the father's house, right? But he didn't know he was home. He still suffered from inferiority and self-exclusion, right? He says in the course we read that this is a journey to who you are always and where you are forever, right? So we've never left, but we're having this hallucination and we're identified as a self that really believes it's outside of the kingdom. And so this is where we can know that it's love, but until we're ready to, like he said in the course, do you want to know the will of your Father for you? Until that becomes a burning desire within your heart, we will prop up the illusion and we will believe we're not at home. So it's such a subtle thing, but it all hinges on us. Again, in A Course in Miracles, he says, you're waiting for yourself. You're waiting upon yourself to make this decision. Ray.
I had the thought of the individual being defined by the ego, wanting to leave paradise or whatever, kind of like a candle wanting to go out and shine brightly on its own, and could never reach the potential of what it left until it came back and joined the brightness and the light of the God, source, power within. And it's like we all have that potential, but we're hiding our candle by not coming back and joining with the source or the eternal light.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it as, like you said, the ego itself is what put us out there and separated us.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to identify that and let it go to rejoin, the one.
Yeah.
The light.
Yeah. Yeah, so, to build on what you're saying, then the ego is the idea that you're all alone in your own mind.
Right.
And you're on your own. And you have to be the one that, judges and evaluates and gives meaning to everything because there is no God. The ego is the proof that God is dead, right? That there is no real God. It's me. And there are others like me, but that's it. And so the purpose of the ego is to always keep that potential, what you're saying is the light of God in us, occluded, right? Distorted, lost, right? That's why, all those parables of the lost coin, the treasure hidden in the field, it's all about this spark of divinity within us. But as long as we believe we're the separated self, we won't look for it and we will not actualize it. But here's the beauty of it all. The whole way that the world is working is it's designed to bring us to this recognition one way or another. So every challenge, every world conflict, every financial crisis, every family squabble, every divorce, every departure of a loved one, these are all opportunities for us to reevaluate who we are and the direction that we're going in. But as we were seeing in that exegesis of the soul, if all we're doing is giving birth to mute, blind, and crippled ideas, we're going to miss the opportunities that are always here knocking to have us actualize the light rather than hide it. Anything else you want to say, Ray? Right. Okay, who else? We got a couple of minutes. Eva.
This reminds me of the Buddhist saying from Shantideva that says, our desires are like licking honey off a razor's edge.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
going on.
Yeah, what,
We have other worldly desires, but it's there. That nectar is just waiting for us. But
yeah, what a visceral image, yes. Yeah, licking honey off of a razor blade are the pleasures of the world. Yeah. Yeah. Think about that one.
blame it on Shanti Day.
Final thoughts? Anybody? We have a minute. Oh, actually, the blue bag's going to go around. So, Ray, thank you for your service and passing the bag. If you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook, remember you can always click the link and donate to the church for the 8 a.m. service. We so appreciate your support and your loving offerings. But while that's occurring, does anybody have any final thoughts that they'd like to share with us this morning? Good. Okay. Remember, we're having that Raise the Roof celebration here, April 29th. There are flyers throughout the church. I believe it starts at 6 p.m., goes till 10 p.m. You get an Italian dinner and lots of dancing and good times. So pick one of these up on the way out if you'd like more details.
And if you can't attend, you can send a donation. to
Thank
help
you, Ray.
raise the roof.
There you go. It's a win-win. So we bless this offering and we charge it with the purpose that it brings light into the world and into the minds of those who are not at home in the world, that all may be truly blessed and truly happy. So it is. Amen. All right, let's seal the deal, everybody. Rise. Resting within the quiet center of the heart, let us make a commitment to discover that we are the treasure of God and put aside all illusions of inferiority and unworthiness, that we may no longer act in ways that cloud us from our true treasure and our true glorious state. And as we come to know this for ourselves, we will also know that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Course in Miracles tomorrow night, 7:15 p.m. Join us. Have a good day, everybody.